Hello, I'm Coach James, and today we are going to work on how to make a good move. In the current position, Black is to play, and he decided to push the pawn to e5. The first thing you want to do, before considering any objective you may have, is to understand why your opponent did what he did. So when the pawn comes to e5, I think, oh, he probably wants to take the knight. The pawn is less valuable, and if he takes the knight, he's going to be at a material advantage. So that limits my options. I have to make knight moves. Now, there are three reasonable knight moves, or I guess three knight moves that come to mind. That's knight f5, knight b3, and knight e2. This also follows a principle of giving yourself options. You see, the more often you compare moves, the higher quality your moves will be, because you'll have to use more mental energy to prove one over the other, and that makes for a better game. So the first move that we can eliminate, which is clearly the worst, is actually knight to e2. You see, Black is doing what he should be doing because he sees that we have an extra pawn in the c file. And what he's going to do is he's going to place his majors on the semi-open c file and try and put as much pressure on that pawn as possible in the hopes to win it. So we undermine our need to protect that pawn by bringing the knight to e2. If we bring our knight to e2, we lose two defenders. We lose the knight and we block the queen. We lose the queen. So the absolute worst move here, I think, is playing knight to e2, because after queen takes on c2, the king moves out of the way, the queen takes the unprotected rook, and the game shortly ends. So we're limited to really two options here. Either we go to b3 or either we go to f5. Now the difference between the two, I suppose we can use a little science here. Yes, they both get out of the way, but which one gets out of the way the best? To answer that, we need to understand the pawn structure. And it might be easy to overlook the pawns, but the pawns actually indicate a lot of what we are trying to do in a position. My little expression with pawns are like the walls of a house, and the pieces behind the pawns are the people who move within the walls. So if you understand how to navigate the walls, you'll get more from your people. So after the move e5, we understand the pawn structure. We see that he has an extra d pawn. We see that we have an extra c pawn. That is the significant imbalance. And between the two, you could say that the d6 pawn is more of a liability to Black than the c2 pawn is for White, because the d6 pawn can never be protected by another pawn, and that makes it a weakness. It makes it a backwards pawn. And if your opponent is aware of the pawn weakness, you can expect that he'll try and get rid of it. So where knight f5 seems to be most natural, it may actually not be the best move, because Black would probably get the d5 pawn push in under the most ideal circumstance. Say if the knight were to come to f5 and the pawn were to come to g6, the knight would be forced to h6. And then when d5 comes, he gets rid of his pawn weakness. So the real question here is, if you cannot stop Black from getting d5 in or getting rid of his pawn weakness, the best situation for you would be to have your pieces optimally placed to handle the breakthrough. So the real question is, if d5 is coming, would you rather your knight be on b3 or would you rather your knight be on h6? And the answer to that is pretty self-evident.